So welcome to today's American Rescue Plan, American Indian Resilience and Education, also known as the ARP-AIRE grant competition for 2021 pre-application webinar. This is the first in a two-part series of pre-application webinars. This one is focused on what's in the fiscal year 2021 ARP-AIRE application package. And you'll hear more about the second part in this series in a bit. Let's kick off as we typically do with our standard disclaimer.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
All right. So just a few logistical pieces as we start today. So all of the participants will be muted today. If you have any questions as we go along, we welcome those questions. Please place them in the chat box. If you're looking for the chat box in Zoom, it is typically located at the bottom of your screen. And you'll normally see in a little toolbar, a little talk bubble. If you click on that talk bubble, it will open up the chat box so that you can go ahead and type your question into that chat box. If you're joining us from a mobile device, then often you'll need to swipe over from right to left in order to get to the chat box, as well as we do have one poll later, and that's often how you would access that poll. If you have any technical issues as we're going through today, you're welcome to reach out to us in the chat box, and one of us from the OIE Technical Assistance team can assist you there. If for some reason you get disconnected and you're unable to rejoin, please email us at oie@seiservices.com and we can assist you in getting reconnected to the webinar. Please know that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording as well as the PDF of that PowerPoint is going to be posted up on the OIE website at the link that you see here on the slide, which is also conveniently over in the chat box for you. So we'll go ahead and jump on into our webinar, but remember, we do welcome your questions. We want you to get all of your questions answered today. So make sure and put those in the chat box throughout, and we'll get to them in each of our Q&A sections. So today, our two presenters that are going to be joining you are Dr. Donna Sabis-Burns, who's the Office of Indian Education Discretionary Group Leader, and Shala Ortega, who's the ARP-AIRE Program Lead and Competition Manager. So I'm going to take it over to Shala to start us off.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Shala Ortega. I serve as the Competition Manager and Program Officer for ARP-AIRE. With us from OIE is Donna Sabis-Burns, our group leader for discretionary team, who's going to be helping me with some of the slides today. Thank you, Donna. Today's webinar is intended to guide you through the application process and what that process involves. ARP-AIRE is a brand new program, and there's a lot to cover concerning this new program. For that reason, we'll be doing two separate webinars, as you heard before, to cover as much as possible. The second webinar for this program is scheduled for Thursday, August 5th, and we'll touch base on the relation between the selection criteria, application requirements, and program requirement. I want to remind everyone that these webinars are intended to help applicants understand what applying for this competition involves. Neither of these two webinars should be taken as a substitute for thoroughly reading the notice inviting application, or as we call it, NIA, and the application package. We strongly encourage you to read both documents I just mentioned before attempting to apply for this competition. We have allowed several opportunities for Q&A sessions during today's webinar. If you have any questions, type them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A sessions. Next slide. Now I'd like to go over the agenda for today's webinar. As you can see, we have a lot to cover. In today's webinar, We'll take you through the application requirements, eligibility, absolute priority, competitive preference priority, introductions to apply, instructions to apply, pardon me, grant application systems, and the resources available to you. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that there will be a second pre-application webinar scheduled for August 5th that will cover much more of the program-related topics. Although attending these webinars is not mandatory, we encourage all who are interested to apply to attend both pre-application webinars. Next slide. So our objectives for today's webinars are to assist applicants learn what is in the FY 2021 ARP-AIRE grant application package, understand the application requirements, understand the program requirement, and there is only one program requirement here, understand what type of forms are required, understand common components of applying for federal grant and using federal application systems, and have an opportunity, or actually more than once, to submit questions to OIE. Next slide. Okay, here's where we are going to take a poll, and I'm going to hand it back to our contractor, Synergy. Could you please take a poll?
Yes, so you should see a poll appearing on your screen shortly asking what type of grantee do you represent? And you can mark whether you're a tribal education agency, otherwise known as a TEA, a consortium of TEAs, so more than one TEA coming together to apply as a group, or not one of those two, you're one of the myriad of other types of entities. If for some reason the poll is not working for you, if you're not able to see that popping up on your screen or on mobile devices when you scroll over, you're welcome to pop your answer to the poll question over in the chat box, and we'll be able to collect it that way as well. All right. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to be able to vote in the poll about what type of applicant you're representing today. And then we'll go ahead and end that poll. So we've got a couple who are in the midst of pressing the button. Give you a second there. All right. So we're pretty evenly split today. I'll post it up here so that all of you can see as well. About 61% of us are representing a tribal education agency. 36% are one of that myriad of other types of organizations. And then about 3%, 2 of you are representing a consortium of TEAs today. So thank you for taking a moment to share there in our poll. And now I'll turn it back over to Shala.
Thank you, Sarah. So now we go back to the ARP-AIRE program and what that entails. So next slide. So we're going to be covering the background of how this program was actually created. In the next few slides, we're going to cover an overview of this new program and the grant competition process. Please note that today's webinar is one of 2 sessions that will cover the required application information for this competition. Today's webinar represents only a portion of the required information about the grant competition. As you can see, we have a lot to cover, so we can only provide as much as possible in the time allowed. For full details, however, be sure to read the notice inviting application, also known as NIA, and the application package. Remember to follow instructions on grants.gov and processes such as DUNS and SAM, and we'll get to those later in the webinar today. Next slide. right? Now let's go over the purpose of this new program. The purpose of ARP-AIRE is to support tribal education agencies, or TEAs, in the provision of direct services to Indian children and youth. That's the purpose of this program. The only purpose this program was created for is to support tribal education agencies in providing direct services to Indian children and youth. Projects must include one or more of the activities that are authorized under Section 6121C of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 as amended ESEA. We're going to get to those activities later, but here we provided a link, a direct link to where these 6121C activities are listed so you can see it for yourself. Next slide. Now, here and the next few slides, we're kind of touch base on the background for this program. Like I said, ARP-AIRE is a brand new one-time discretionary competition authorized under Section 11061 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, also known as ARP, to provide awards to TEAs for activities authorized under Section 6121C of the ESEA in order to meet the urgent needs of students in response to the coronavirus 2019, or COVID-19 as we know it, pandemic. These activities include a broad range of direct services to Indian children and youth, their teachers and families. So it's not limited to just children and youth, Indian children and youth, but it extends to their children, teachers and families. The department also conducted a tribal consultation back in April 26 to get input from tribes when creating this, before creating this, this new program, and incorporate as much of that as possible into the new program. Now, we're not going to go over the tribal consultation results, but if you need to read more about it, you can access the link that's provided here. Just to highlight again that this is a brand new program and it's a one-time discretionary grant competition. So what that means is that this grant competition is not going to be offered in future years. This is the only time that's being offered. Next slide. Oh, and before you go, hold on. The one other point that I need to make is that this new program, ARP-AIRE, does not replace the STEP grant program. This is just a brand new program separate from STEP. It doesn't replace it. Next slide. Okay, and here's a chart, and it's just a snapshot of what the program entails. Let's start with the eligibility piece of it. Who are the eligible applicants? As we said, TEAs, including a consortium of TEAs. And if you are applying as a consortium, then you need to consult the regulations that we've noted here, 34 CFR 75.127 through 129, for information about group applications. Before you apply as a consortium, consult that regulation I just mentioned to make sure that it actually, what you're proposing fits the information that's provided. So estimated funds available, $19,800,000 for 3 years. Again, this is a one-time grant program that covers 3 years. And the $19,800,000 is to cover the 3-year number of awards that we offer for 3 years. Estimated range of awards is $300,000 to $500,000 for each 12-month budget period. Again, what that means is that the program is a 3-year program, so there is going to be a 3 budget period each 12 months. So the $300,000 to $500,000 applies to each of those budget period years for up to 3 years. Estimated average size of awards is $400,000 for each 12-month budget period. Project period, like I said, is 36 months or 3 years, as we say, and estimated number of awards is 16 for each 12-month budget period. What that means is that if there are 16 awardees, then those 16 awardees have 3 12-month budget periods in their award that they'll be funded for. The application deadline is again September 13, 21, pardon me, September 13, 2021, and that's a published deadline and it's not going to change. Next slide. Okay, so in this slide and the next few slides, actually, we're going to touch base on more details about the application requirements and eligibility. Next slide. The question we often ask when we have a new program is who's eligible to apply for grants. In this case, for this particular program, it's tribal education agencies or TEAs, including a consortium of such TEAs. Please note that if you're applying as a consortium, again, that you should refer and read the information provided under 34 CFR 7.75.127 to 129 for information about group applications before you apply. Next slide. I'd like to touch base on what tribal education is and how it's defined in this program. Tribal education, as defined in section 6132 of the ESEA, means the agency, department, or instrumentality of one or more federally recognized or state recognized tribes that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. Now, when you're applying or trying to apply, please pay close attention to this definition of what a TEA is. There is no other substitute for this definition, and it's only the TEAs can apply, and the definition here for what a TEA means is right here. This definition is also in the notice inviting application that we published, and it is how the Department of Education defines what a TEA means. Next slide. This program has a hiring preference condition, and we decided to include the statutory hiring preferences here. I'm not going to go over it very in detail, only to mention that for the purpose of this preference, an Indian is defined as a member of any federally recognized Indian tribe. That's B, as you see at the end of the, at the bottom of this slide. But here the statutory hiring preferences is what you need to follow if you're applying for this program. Next slide. Okay, so program requirement. There is only one program requirement, and that kicks in after an award is issued. Just to be sure, this is going to kick in after an award is issued, and that is that within 6 months after the date of the award, the grantee, not the applicant, the grantee must submit to the department a signed written agreement with each LEA where participating students are enrolled. Now, the agreement must also include provisions that allow the grantee to access data that is necessary for the success of the project and for reporting on project objectives. That's very important. If there is an agreement that needs to be submitted, then you have to make sure that access to data and that is needed for the success of the project and for reporting on the project objectives are available. And one other thing to mention here, very important, is that Agreements between tribally controlled schools and grantees are not required if the school and grantee are controlled by the same tribe. So if you're a TEA of a tribe and the schools that you are including as your partnering schools in this application, then if you're both part of the same tribe and the schools are controlled by that tribe, you're not required to submit an agreement. Next slide. Okay, so here we're going to get into the absolute priority and competitive preference priority. Next slide. Okay, so let's go over the priorities for this program. This program contains one absolute priority and one competitive preference priority. These priorities must be clearly identified in the application, and the best place to identify these priorities is in the abstract section of your application. So your application has many parts. There's an abstract section, and in the abstract section of your application, you identify the priority that you have selected. In this case, the only priority that we have included. So, so that is basically what you need to do about the priorities and where you need to include them in your application in the abstract section. Next slide. Now we're going to go over over each priority, starting with the absolute priority. What is the absolute priority? It's what the program was named after, American Indian Resilience in Education, or ARP-AIRE. That's your absolute priority. Now, there is more than that involved in what the absolute priority actually entails. To meet this priority, applicants must propose a culturally based project designed to assist and encourage Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12. That includes at least one of the following activities from section 6121C of the ESCA. We're going to get into those activities in a few minutes, but I just want to make sure that you understand that the absolute priority comes with these conditions that you have to meet after you choose one or more of the approved activities under section 6121C. You have to make sure that the activity or the activities that you have selected are very much in line with the absolute priority in that when you propose a project, it needs to be culturally relevant, and it should be designed to assist and encourage Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12. So in the next few slides, we're going to go over these required or approved ESCA activities. Please note that this program is a direct service program. Next slide. Okay, now these activities are numbered here, but don't go by we numbered them for ease of reference. But what I don't want us to do is to just use the number when we are referencing in the application and just mention the number. You must include the actual language for each or any of the activities that you select from the list as they're listed in 6121C under the approved activities. So do not try to reinterpret or reinvent a new language for these activities. You must use the language that is provided in 6121C, and don't just go by the number. Make sure that the actual activity that you have selected is what you include in your application. So let's start with number 1. Again, these are numbered for ease of reference. The first one is innovative programs related to the educational needs of educationally disadvantaged Indian children and youth. That's number one. Number two, educational services that are not available to such children and youth in sufficient quantity or quality, including remedial instruction to raise the achievement of Indian children in one or more of the subjects of English, mathematics, science, foreign languages, art, history, and geography. Number three, bilingual and bicultural programs and projects. Now it's going to continue. Go to the next slide. Number four, again, we're on 61221C activities. We're continuing those activities here. A special health and nutrition services and other related activities that address the special health, social, and psychological problems of Indian children and youth. Number four is about comprehensive guidance, counseling, and testing services. Number five, pardon me, that was number five. Number six is early childhood education programs that are effective in preparing young children to make sufficient academic growth by the end of grade 3, including kindergarten and pre-K programs, family-based preschool programs that emphasize school readiness, screening and referral, and the provision of services to Indian children and youth with disabilities. Next slide. Again, continuing with the approved and authorized 6121C activities. Number 7 is partnership projects between local educational agencies and institutions of higher education that allow secondary school students to enroll in courses at the post-secondary level to aid such students in the transition from secondary to post-secondary education. Number 8 is partnership projects between schools and local businesses for career preparation programs designed to provide Indian youth with the knowledge and skills youth need to make an effective transition from school to a high skill career. Okay, so continuing with the more activities. Next slide. Next slide, starting with number 9, programs designed to encourage and assist Indian students to work toward and gain entrance into institutions of higher education. Number 10 is about family literacy services. Remember, we said it's not just about students, it's about families and teachers. Number 11 is activities that recognize and support the unique cultural and educational needs of Indian children and youth and incorporate traditional leaders. This is where your tribal elders come in, if that's what you choose. Number 12, or the last one, is high quality professional development of teaching professionals and paraprofessionals. Again, all these we just mentioned, all these approved activities under 6121C is what you need to tap into to choose at least one. You're not limited to one, you can choose more than one. You're not going to get more points if you choose more than one, but you can choose more than one, and then link them to the absolute priority and the language we provided under the absolute priority. Make sure they're all linked and explained clearly. Okay, very good. Next, go to the next slide. Here, I'd like to touch base on what the eligibility as a group is again. One of the questions we often get is, can multiple TAs apply as a group? Yes. Yes, multiple TAs can apply as a group with one lead TA as the applicant. So if you want to form a consortium or a group of several TAs, all TAs are not going to be identified as the lead applicants. Only one can be identified as the lead applicant for the for the group. Please note that there is a competitive preference priority for lead applicants who are novice, and we're going to get into what novice is in a minute. But if you are a group applicant and your lead applicant is a novice, you can get additional points for competitive preference priority. A novice is defined as a TA that has not had an active discretionary grant from the department in the past 5 years. So let me again go over this. A novice TA is defined as a TA that has not had an active discretionary grant from the US Department of Education, not the entire federal government, just the US Department of Education in the past 5 years. If applying as a group, only the lead TA must be novice in order for the group applicant to receive the competitive preference priority points. That's very important. So if you're a group, not all of you have to be a novice TA in order to take advantage of the competitive priority points that we provide. Only the novice lead applicant, the lead applicant has to be novice in order for the group to take advantage of those points. And the lead TA is the one applying on behalf of the group. If you're applying as a group, again, you must follow the regulations in 34 CFR 75-127 to 129 governing group applications when submitting a consortium application. Please consult that, that regulation before you apply as a group to make sure that actually what you consider to be a consortium fits the regulation information or the information provided in the regulation. Next slide. We talked about the competitive preference priority, and here's what that means. Applicants that are considered new potential grantees. That's what it means, competitive, new applicants. And can get up to 5 points. To meet this priority, again, the novice applicant must not have had an active discretionary grant from the department in the past 5 years. For an applicant that is a consortium of TEA, if the lead applicant meets this requirement, it will receive the novice points, even if not all consortium members meet this requirement. Only the lead applicant for a consortium has to meet the novice requirement in order to take it for the consortium to take advantage of the competitive preference priority points. Again, it's very important for you to clearly identify the competitive preference priority in the project abstract. Now we're gonna, next slide, we're gonna go over some questions you may have submitted. Next slide. We're gonna try to respond to these questions as much as possible. If we don't get to them all, we'll try to respond to them later and then post them on the OIE website for you to access and review. Please give us a little time. It's going to take us a little time to do all that and post it on the OIE website, but we're now going over the questions you have posted in the chat box. Synergy, could you start reading some of those questions?
Yeah, so your first question is, are Alaska Native corporations eligible?
You know, this webinar is not about defining what each potential applicant, whether each potential applicant may or may not be eligible. All we can provide you is what is considered an eligible applicant. And could you please put that slide up?
Yes.
Talks about the eligibility, yes. Okay, who's eligible to apply for this grant? Tribal education agencies or TEAs, including a consortium of such TEAs. So whether you are a, I don't know, 501c3 nonprofit representing a tribe or some other institution, what we are going for is the tribal education agency as defined in the regulations, what the tribal education agency is. And that is the agency department, or instrumentality of one or more federally recognized or state recognized Indian tribes that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. This is the definition of a TEA, and TEAs are the only ones who can apply or eligible to apply for this program.
All right, and the next question is, if they operate as the TEA for a tribe, however, they do not have a federal designation as a TEA, is that okay?
Again, a TEA, Tribal Education Agency, the way it's defined is again, agency, department, or instrumentality. Instrumentality basically refers to a department or an office or agency or whatever component of a tribe that is designated to be the tribal education agency for that tribe. But the tribe itself must also be either a federally recognized tribe or a state recognized tribe.
All right. Next question was why the list of 6121C from the actual act is different from the list in the grant package.
I don't believe there is a difference in the grants package, and 6121C list is what we got from the, could you put that up again? The 6121C list?
Yes.
What happened is that when we designed the absolute priority, we designed it so that, and if you could just flash the absolute priority there for just a moment. The way the absolute priority was designed is to make sure that that issues such as culturally relevant components or elements of and other elements such as the youth, the re-entry and entry into the school at any grade level. Those are the languages that we wanted to include in the absolute priority, and they were pulled from the list of approved 6121C activities, list of activities. But they're all interconnected, and we're not introducing anything new here or different from what is listed under the 6121C approved activities list.
All right. Next question is, TEAs are typically under the direction of the tribe. Thus, they'd be applying as the tribe. Is that correct? Or would they need to apply specifically as the tribal education agency?
Tribal education agencies are designated by tribes, correct. But we're talking about tribes that are either federally recognized or state recognized. And if they have designated an office or a department within the tribe as their tribal education agency to apply for this program, and that's who is going to apply for the program on behalf of the tribe, yes, as a TEA.
All right, thank you. Is the TEA able to include language and culture programming as part of this funding opportunity?
Again, one of the if you could go back to the list of activities we have, one of them deals with the language and culture. Actually, the absolute priority includes a culturally relevant project. So there's one that you have to kind of connect whatever proposal you would like to design, and then language and culture, I believe, is listed under number 11. Says activities that recognize and support the unique cultural and educational needs of Indian children and youth and incorporate traditional leaders. That's one place that's mentioned. So look at the list of approved and authorized activities on 6121C and see what fits best, what you have in mind, and then relate that directly related to the absolute priority language we provided.
All right. Going back to number 5 on the list is that school counseling or psychological counseling, and what kind of testing?
We're not getting to what kind of testing. We're just going by the activities that are listed on the 6121C. Number 5 doesn't specify which testing services or what type of counseling. So again, the best way to approach this is to pay attention to what the absolute priority is and the language that was constructed under the absolute priority. And any of these activities that you choose must speak to the language that was introduced under the absolute priority to make that clear connection. So if it's number 5 you want to go with, then that's what you would respond to. But remember that absolute priority, if you could go back to that for just a minute, Sarah. Okay, remember, under the absolute priority, to meet this priority, you must propose a culturally relevant project designed to assist and encourage Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12. So whatever activities you choose under 6121C must speak to this, the language that we introduced under absolute priority, and directly connect to it.
Can you select more than one 6121C activity in your proposal if this is what your tribe would like to do?
You are more than welcome to collect more than one. Just make sure that whatever you select, if it's one or more, it says at least one. So you have to at least choose one, but you're not limited to one. You can choose 2, 3, 5 if you want, but make sure that you connect, that you make direct connection to what you choose to the absolute priority, and then in detail explain how you propose to actually achieve the goals and objectives of what you have selected. Remember, this is direct services. It's a direct service program, and it's not limited to just servicing students. It's also, it's broad enough to include training of professional and paraprofessionals, and also families of those students.
Great. So this is their first encounter with the TEA definition, and they'd like to know, is there a process that you have to go through to demonstrate that you are in fact a TEA? Is there any documentation that you would have to provide, or a specific process you have to go through to do so?
All I can tell you that we do not require any documentation. We do do our due diligence to make sure that the TAs that are applying are actually TAs of federally recognized or state recognized tribes as much as possible. The best way for you to basically make it easier to go through the review process and so forth, if you submit an application, is to identify exactly what you are, whether you're a TA of a federally recognized, what tribe you're part of, what the name of your tribe is, or a state recognized tribe, to identify yourself in your project abstract, so that then, it can be identified as easily as possible. So you have to basically go through that, the step of identifying who you are, what you're going to be doing, as early in the application as possible. Usually the application abstract is the best place to put it, and sort of take it from there. That's as much as I can help you with. I cannot sit here and identify whether each applicant is, or potential applicant is or is not eligible. All I can do is go over the eligibility definition and what that means in terms of applying for this program.
The next question is in regards to the novice applicant piece, and asking within that, is NYCP a discretionary grant?
NYCP is a discretionary grant, but remember, in order to take advantage of a novice, the status of a novice, being a novice, is that the potential applicant, novice applicant, cannot have had an active grant from the U.S. Department of Education in the past 5 years. So that's what the term novice means here, if you want to take advantage of the competitive preference priority.
Great. Next question, through your administrative costs taken off the top of the 20 million, will you have technical assistance providers for TEA's applications?
I'm not really clear on what that question is about. I'm not sure. I need more. I need to know more before I can respond to that. So if whoever is asking question can elaborate on that, I really appreciate it.
Great, and I'll watch the chat box for their clarification.
Thank you.
Are native languages defined as foreign language in number 2 of section 6121C?
I can't interpret that what native languages are considered to be under the US laws and the laws governing languages. All I can tell you is what the activities are and how they're listed. Potentially foreign languages could be languages other than spoken in the US, United States and its territories, but I cannot be sure. This is something I'm going to have to look into and respond to later. So if you could mark that as something to be looked into later, whether
Yes.
native languages are considered foreign languages.
That'll be denoted. And then are we required to submit a letter from the tribe designating Tribal Education Department as TEA, or can they just make that statement in the application?
We are not making a requirement to have any letters submitted. However, the more information you provide, the better it's going to be, but it's not a requirement. But remember, we do our due diligence to make sure that the applicants who are applying are actually TEAs of a federally recognized or a state recognized tribe. If there are ways for you to provide information to us in your application, and that would be great. However, we do our search in that respect to make sure that we are, about eligibility of applicants. So.
Great. And then our previous question did provide clarification. They asked, you're giving priority points to novice applications. Several TEAs will consider your application process burdensome and will not apply as it is daunting. Will you have TA providers available through your administrative costs to walk applicants through the process? Oftentimes the capacity of TEAs is restricted to 1 or 2 staff.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question here. I'm going to need more clarification on what they mean by administrative costs as far as we're concerned. So I need clarification what administrative costs they're talking about. Administrative costs for the TEAs or for the U.S. Department of Education. I'm not sure about that. So
Yeah,
as far as providing technical assistance, these pre-application webinars are our ways of providing technical assistance to apply for these programs. Discretionary grant programs competitions are usually very complex, and it does require work to apply for these programs. There is no going around it. And unfortunately, although it's complicated, it's something that has to be done. So really, there is no other way for us to make it easier except to have pre-application webinars such as this to help applicants kind of at least become familiar with what applying for a program like this involves.
Great, thank you, Shala. That's our last question for this section.
Great, thank you. Those are good questions. Just keep adding them. So very good. Back to the webinar. So let me just make sure. Could you tell me very quickly which slide number this is?
28.
48?
28.
Oh, 28. I wish it was 48, but that's all right. We'll go with 28. All right, very good. So, so the following few slides are going to cover the application process. Next slide. Again, okay. So you're going to see this sort of this alert system we have here, application deadline several times. We just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the deadline for applying and the time and the date for applying. This is the deadline, it's published. There is no changing it. And remember, you may or may not be in Eastern time where you are, 11:59 p.m. on the date of deadline date for the application submission is in Eastern time, and grants.gov operates in Eastern time. So whatever time zone you're in, make sure that whatever time your cutoff time is, as far as 11:59, that you note that, so that you don't get confused over your end of the day time, whatever that is, and the time we are giving you here. So you can submit your application up to 11:59 p.m. Once that time is passed, your application will not be accepted. Okay, so next slide. Here we're going to go over the application package. Again, this is not going to be a comprehensive coverage. The application package is your guide to all the required components of the ARP-AIRE application. And the following information we're providing is an abbreviated form of the application package. There is a lot to cover, and we just don't have the time and the place to do that. So we just want to give you a bird's eye view of what's involved, but encourage you to go to grants.gov to read more about it. So the information we're providing here is just a snapshot. So here's a direction to how to get to the application package, as you see on your screen. If you go to grants.gov, there's a search box on the right-hand side where you enter, I think the word you enter is Indian resilience. That's all you have to do to enter Indian resilience. Click, and and then the correct option will appear. Here it's highlighted on your screen what it says, and then what you have to do is click the package. See the box that's circled with in red. It says package in it. That's what you click to start your application process. That's as much as we wanted to go over as far as the application process itself is concerned. We'll give you tips as we go through this webinar, but really to get a more comprehensive look at what the application process is, go to grants.gov to become familiar with. Next slide. Okay, so the next couple of slides are about the application submission checklist. So there is a checklist that you have to follow, and it is recommended that your electronic application be organized in the following manner and include the following parts in order to expedite the review process. So there is a method to this madness. There is an order to this process, and to make it easier and more convenient for yourself as well as the reader, you want to make sure that you follow the order in which these parts come. So that's very important. Instructions for all the parts and forms that you see for the application are found either on the following pages, following the application package in grants.gov, or individually for each part in grants.gov. So either you go to where they are, collectively or individually under grants.gov. When applying electronically through grants.gov, you will need to ensure that the DUNS number. DUNS is the data universal numbering system that your entity has. The DUNS number you enter on your application, and you must enter a DUNS number on your application, is the same DUNS number that was used by your organization when it registered with the System for Award Management. That's SAM. Make sure, if you don't know what that is, consult with your business office or finance office to make sure you understand what that is. It's very important that the DUNS numbers match the DUNS number that you provide on your application and the one already provided in SAM. The two of them must be the same. And then review your electronic application to make sure you have completed the following forms and section, and that's what we're going to go through. Part 1 is the preliminary documents, and that is your form SF424. That's basically your, I would say, cover page, if you could call it that. It's very self-explanatory. If you go through it, there are boxes that you fill in, and it's instructions that says what you put in each box. And then you also have to do the supplemental information for SF424. Again, it's self-explanatory. It comes with instruction that tells you how to fill it out. Then part 2 is the budget information. This is very important. You have to fill this out. And it's form 524. And this is the budget information for non-construction programs. That's the one you're going to be using. And it's already uploaded in grants.gov. You don't have to search for it. It's all in there. So, but it's important to fill them out. If you're filling out and it's a 3-year program, make sure your budget information is for 3-year program. Part 3 is your project abstract form. So remember we talked about absolute priority, identifying yourself as novice if that applies to you, and whether you're a federally recognized, state recognized, all that information. That's where you can put it, project abstract, part 3. Next slide. Part 4 is your project narrative attachment form. This is your application narrative. This is where you're gonna tell us what your plan is, what your goals and objectives are, what you plan to do, how you're gonna basically connect the absolute priority that we went over, remember, and the whatever what is it, required list of activities on 6121 under 6121C you selected, whether you selected one or more than one. This is where you bring them all together and make the connection. You have to be very clear. You have to explain everything and don't let anything lead anything to guessing what you are saying or not saying. So just make sure that you're very clear in your planning processes is where you plan what you're going to do and say. And if there is any doubt in your mind how to put an application narrative together, again, grants.gov has tips on that you can access and kind of educate yourself in terms of how to pull a project narrative together. Part 5 is your budget narrative attachment. Again, this is your budget narrative. And remember, part 4 and part 5 are very much connected. So whatever you put in your application narrative, it technically should be supported by the way you design your budget to show how you're going to spend money if you're awarded to achieve the goals and objectives that you have put in place in your application narrative. So make sure that you are making the connection as you develop these two parts. Part 6 is other attachments, and this is usually individual resumes for project directors and key personnel, and a copy of the indirect cost rate agreement if you're planning to apply an indirect cost rate agreement and collect on it. So next slide. Okay, part 7 is basically your assurances and certifications, and that includes disclosure of lobbying activities, grants.gov lobbying form, and General Education Provision Act, that's your GEPA requirements. And also, so that's basically what those forms are. And you have to fill them out and include them. Part 8 is the intergovernmental review, or it's also known as the Executive Order 12372. And that's the single point of contact, or SPOC list, as they call it. However, the regulations in 34 CFR Part 79 that apply to all applicants, and it's about Part A, it applies to all applicants except federally recognized Indian tribes. So if you're a federally recognized Indian tribes, Part 8 doesn't apply to you. Next slide. So here's the indirect cost information. We're not going to get into it very deep. If you are one of those applicants who wants to, wants reimbursement in terms of indirect costs, then you have to make sure that you have an indirect cost rate agreement in place. This tells you, gives you information about what that is and how to obtain one. You could either obtain it through a federal cognizant agency, such as U.S. Department of Interior, which is where a lot of tribes, TAs have an arrangement to get a indirect cost rate agreement. And or if you don't have one and you are interested in seeing what else you can do, the department, you can apply through the department, U.S. Department of Education, for a temporary indirect cost rate. So to do that, you can access the link we provided here for information, and there's also a phone number you can call for additional information. Next slide. Okay, now question time again. So why don't we go back to the chat box and see what questions.
Great. So the first question is, are there any required letters of support or commitment from local LEAs or tribes?
We don't require them. If you want to include them, you're more than welcome, but it's not a requirement as far as this program is concerned.
And the RFP mentions a cover sheet. What goes on the cover sheet?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The RFP mentions a cover sheet. What goes on the cover sheet?
Well, it's the forms that we just covered. If you could go back to the forms we listed, Part 1 and Part 2, 424. Okay, here's your preliminary documents. Application for federal assistance, Form 424, and then add supplemental information, 424, SF 424. Those are the forms that you have to provide.
Great. And is there a required project abstract?
Yes, there is. And here's Part 3. Part 3 on the same the slide we have up, it says ed abstract form, project abstract. It is required.
Okay. And what are the required attachments?
Why don't we go to the other attachments so we see what they are. Other attachments. So here, other attachments could be individual resumes for project directors and key personnel. So the project you're proposing should include who the project director is or has been designated at the time of application. You should include the resumes for those folks and a copy of indirect cost rate agreement if you have one. If you don't, and you're planning to apply for one through the U.S. Department of Education, you have to indicate that as well. But those are the other attachments that we have included here to be included in your application.
Great. Could you please give an example of an instrumentality and explain how an instrumentality can be distinguished from a department or an agency?
Let's go back to the definition of a TEA, if you don't mind, the way it's defined in the regs. Okay. So tribal education agency is defined in such a way that it would allow because we don't know all the various departments or offices, or as we call instrumentalities, that are selected by a federally recognized or a state recognized tribe designated to serve as their tribal education agency. We call it tribal education agency. It could be tribal education department. There may be tribes, federally recognized or state recognized tribes, that may have other offices within their governing system that are designated to serve like a tribal education agency that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. Whatever the entity's name is that may be taken as the tribal education agency and recognized as such by the federally recognized or state recognized tribe must be the instrumentality department. That's what it means, department, office, agency that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. So whatever the name of the office or institution within the tribe is that is designated and recognized as the TEA must be the one that's primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. I can't emphasize that enough. So if you have a department that's a police department, but their responsibility is totally different from what we are explaining here, then and they are designated as a TEA, they won't be serving as a TEA or won't be recognized as a TEA. Again, you have to go back to the definition. It's defined to make sure that whatever office or department or agency within the tribal system is designated as TEA, that actually is the one that is primarily responsible for the education, elementary and secondary education of Indian students.
Great. And are there match requirements for this opportunity?
No, there are no match requirements for this opportunity, but it doesn't prevent you from providing a match if you want to, but it's not required.
And is there a structure or required elements for the project abstract?
I think we don't have a structure in place, but I think common sense dictates to look at, first of all, to decide what kind of program you're proposing and then put a structure around it. And the abstract is basically a snapshot of what your project narrative is going to propose, project narrative is going to be. So you can't develop an abstract without developing a project narrative that includes goals and objectives and actually gets into the minute details of how you propose to carry out the project. So that's what determines the structure. The project narrative that you will be proposing determines the structure of your project abstract.
And under Form 424, 19C, should federally recognized tribes check C, program is not covered by EO?
To be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that. So we're going to have to research that and get back to you on that. So if you could note that so we can get back.
Yes. And is it helpful to include the use of partners within the tribal community?
Again, you have to go back to what the absolute priority says and which of the authorized activities you are including and the partnership that you're forming. So just, you have to kind of look at what you are, first of all, it depends on which one of those activities you're selecting. And then if there is partnership involved, of course, you want to include explanation of how that partnership is and how you're going to make it happen. So it's all in the project narrative that you're going to be developing the goals and objectives in the narrative. So
yeah. And are there GEPRA goals for this grant?
Are there what?
Are there GEPRA goals?
Yes, there is a GEFRA measure and it's listed in the NIA. I didn't cover that. So GEFRA, the Government Performance and Results Act is actually the measure that we introduced. When I say we, I'm talking about the federal agency under the direction of Congress. Federal agencies have to introduce a Government Performance and Results Act measure in programs that, in discretionary programs that are offered to measure the success of the program as a whole, not individual program grantees, but the program as a whole. And there is one for this program, and I don't have access to it right now, but it's printed in the notice inviting application if you need to know what it is.
And can they use non-educational partnerships like counseling service providers?
Again, go back to the list of approved activities under 6121C. You can't just select things that are outside what it is that you're trying to do. And if you happen to select an activity, approved activity under the number of activities that we covered that appear under 6121C that it speaks to that, then you have to respond to that as well. Yes.
Thanks, Shala. That's the last question in this section.
Great, thank you. All very good questions. Thank you for asking them. Now, let's move on to the application system. And could you remind me which slide number, what slide number this is? The slide
You're
number.
on slide 36.
36, very good, thank you. All right, very good. So, so we're going to talk about the application submission instructions and tips. So if you could go to the next slide. Okay, very good. So let's start with some tips. Applications for grants under this program must be submitted electronically. Now, there's no other way for you to submit it. You have to submit it electronically using the government-wide grants.gov apply site at grants.gov. That's where you submit an application. Through this site, you will be able to download a copy of the application package, complete that application offline, and then upload and submit your application. Please do not email an electronic copy of your grant application to us. It's not going to be eligible. We will not be there. We will not consider it. So I just want to make sure you know that. So if you are a new or would like a refresher on applying to a grant at the department, you can also review our common instructions for applications to the Department of Education for discretionary grant programs. And this was published in the Federal Register back in 2019. We give you a link here where you can access it and read all about it. Just 1 minute, okay. And do not upload, this is very important, do not upload any passport protected files to your application. If you do that, your application will not be accepted. It will be rejected. When attaching files, make sure that you limit the size of your file name. And again, grants.gov is the best place to go to find out more about this. Lengthy file names could result in difficulties with opening and processing your application. So be mindful of that when you name your files before you upload your attachments or whatever it is you're uploading with your application to make sure your application doesn't run into any difficulties. Your application must be fully uploaded and submitted and must be date and time stamped by the grants.gov system no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on the application deadline. I can't emphasize that. If you get to it late, past that time, your application will not reach us. So just make sure that you adhere to those instructions, except as otherwise noted in the Federal Register notice for this competition. We will not consider your application if it's date and time stamped by the grants.gov later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on the application deadline date. grants.gov applicant must apply online using Workspace. Again, Workspace is a very good place for you to start your application. Grants.gov has instructions how you can create Workspace. We didn't want to get into it here because it's very lengthy. You can either create a workspace for an individual, or you can create a shared environment when members of a grant team, if you have a grant team, may access and edit different parts of a form, or whatever other pieces you assign them to within an application. An applicant can also create an individual workspace, like I said, for each application notice, and establish for that application a collaborative application package. Like I said, a collaborative workspace that allows more than one person in the applicant's organization to work concurrently on an application. Be sure to read the instruction how to do that. It's very useful. I have seen others do it, and it's very useful. They really like to create workspace to work in. So see if you want to do it that way, and read the instructions how to do it. Again, register early. Grants.gov registration involves many steps, including registration on SAM through SAM.gov, which and it may take approximately 1 week to complete, but it could take an upward of several weeks to complete, the registration in SAM.gov. So be mindful of all that. Then, depending on the completeness and accuracy of the data entered into SAM database by an applicant, it may be even longer. You may begin working on your application while completing the registration process in SAM.gov, but you cannot submit an application until all of the registration steps are completed. Please note that once your SAM registration is active, it will take 24 to 48 hours for that information to be available in grants.gov. So it's not real life or real time, rather, activity here. It takes time for whatever you enter in SAM.gov to be transferred to grants.gov. So your organization will need to update its SAM registry annually. This is just sort of an FYI. You may or may not know about that, but you can also consult other offices you're working with within your organization, like their finance office or business office, to help you with that process. Next slide. Okay, very good. And here are some procedures tips for you. Please read the submission tips very carefully. If your application has a status of received, it's still waiting for validation by grants.gov. You have to pay attention to these, to the status of your application. Check it frequently to make sure you understand what it is, what status it is. Once validation is complete, the status will either change to validated or rejected with errors. So this is where you need to pay close attention to the second part, rejected with errors. What does that mean? If the status is rejected with errors, your application has not been received successfully, which means you may have to resubmit again. Some of the reasons for why grants.gov may reject an application can be accessed through this link we included on this slide. It may be helpful for you to kind of know what these error messages are, to prepare yourself for, to try to prevent it from happening while you're applying. Again, submit early. We can't emphasize this enough. Very important to submit early. You can see how much time it takes to just go through some of these tips, and these tips are not the entirety of what is in grants.gov. So because of that, we strongly recommend that you do not wait until the last day to submit your application. Grants.gov will put a date timestamp on your application and then process it after it is fully uploaded. Just remember, it has to be fully uploaded for them to process it. The time it takes to upload an application may vary depending on a number of factors, including the size of the application and the speed of your internet connection. So the more attachments you have, the more time it may take you to upload your application. The longer the names of your files, the more time it may take to upload those pieces of your application. Just remember all that. And also, again, if grants.gov rejects your application, you will need to resubmit successfully, and that's very important, to grants.gov before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on the deadline date. Again, remember, this is Eastern Time we're giving you. Grants.gov operates in Eastern Time. You may not operate in the same time zone we are, so be mindful of that and make sure that you are aware of that, whatever the cutoff time is in your time zone, so that you don't go beyond it. But then why wait until the last minute to apply? And one more reason to apply as early as possible. Okay, again, note to submit successfully, you must provide the DUNS number on your application that was used when you registered as an authorized organization representative, or AOR. Your business office or your finance office may know more about that, so check with them if you don't understand what that is. So grants.gov recognizes that this DUNS number that was provided through your AOR is what they recognize, and that's the one you should use. This DUNS number is typically the same number that was used when your organization registered with SAM. So remember, whatever DUNS number was in SAM is the DUNS number you want to use for the application you're proposing to submit. If you do not enter the same DUNS number on your application as the DUNS number you registered with SAM, grants.gov will reject your application. Just remember that. Again, if I haven't said that already, SAM stands for System for Award Management. And DUNS number stands for Data Universal Numbering System. And it's a 9-digit number that establishes and is assigned by Dun and Bradstreet, and establishes it's a unique number that identifies business entities, tribes, TAs, and so on. Next slide. Okay, more tips about problems. What would you do? What should you do if you run into a problem? Well, this is what you do. And this slide tells you who to call. What you don't want to do is call us. We do not do problem solving in grants.gov. You have to go to grants.gov. When you're submitting applications, you run into problems, you must contact their, and these are the various ways you can contact. You can contact their customer support service, either by calling or sending an email. If you don't like to do that, then there is a self-service knowledge-based web portal you can access to see if the problem you're running into has already been responded to, and there is a Q&A there that you can take advantage of. And for additional tips related to submitting, pardon me, it's part of this is being covered. Submitting grant applications, please refer to the grants.gov application FAQs. There is an FAQ link provided here that you can access to see if the issue that you're struggling with has already been responded to and what you can do about it. Next slide.
And Shala, just to note that we are running a bit short on time.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I'll try to speed up. Okay, more tips about grants.gov and sam.gov. And here's again information about how you can access sam.gov, what you need to do to make sure that you have everything in place before you apply. There is some they have relaxed the requirements for applying for sam.gov through sam.gov, but to just be sure that this still applies today, you need to check with the number, toll-free number that's provided here to make sure that this information is still holds today. You know, they change information all the time, so just want to make sure you have the latest information. Next slide. Okay, some general tips for you. And again, read the NIA and application package more than once. Best way to prepare is to read them once before you start and then read them again while you're applying, and then once before you submit your application in grants.gov. So do repeated reading of the NIA. I am the program officer and the competition manager. I was involved in pulling this program together, and I can tell you, I've read it many times and I'm still reading it. So, you know, so if you don't, you know, you need to just keep reading to make sure you don't forget what's in it. Again, start early. Don't wait until the last few days to apply. Next slide. I don't know if we have time to cover more questions, but do we?
We do have 2 questions. I'm going to hold those for the end of the webinar time so we can get through the last couple of slides.
Very good. So let's just move on to the next slide. Thank you. All right, very quickly, we're going to touch base on the eligibility screening and panel review process. We're not covering this in length. It's a very involved process, but just to let you know what happens after you submit an application. Applications will be screened for eligibility. So the easier you make it for us to find whether you're eligible or not, the better. Remember the abstract section, that's where you put them. Notice of ineligibility will be sent by email, and all eligible applications will be reviewed. So as far as the panel instruction is concerned, it's independent, and it will independent read and score all eligible applications that are assigned to them. And typically we have 3 independent outside peer reviewers assigned to a panel. We may have more than 1 panel depending on how many applications we get. There is usually a panel discussion or maybe even more than 1. Then followed by, after the review is completed, it's followed by ranking order of average final scores. And so that's basically some of the sort of the highlights of the panel review process that we have in place. Again, to remind everyone, we have a very compressed review window. So help the reviewers with clear applications. Next slide. Again, application deadline. I can't emphasize to pay close attention to this deadline. Next slide. Okay, here I'm going to hand it back to Donna Sabis-Burns. Donna, if you could take over here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Shala. And I know that we're at time. So luckily, these last few slides are just some resources for you. So I'm just going to very quickly look at those before we ask any last minute questions. Consult the NIA if you have any doubt of where to find the application package on grants.gov. Once again, it is here, and the grant funding opportunity number is listed for easy access. Next slide, please. While you're all writing your application, of course, it's always helped to reference the financial requirements and expectations there. Here you can find links to the resources that address all these types of things and more. And it highlights for you which ones those are. Next slide, please. Told you I was going fast. The tutorials, there's video tutorials on helping with filling out a federal grant opportunity. And there's also a webinar recording of this particular session that will be posted on our ARP-AIRE website. And you can, so I saw somebody was asking about the slides. The PDF of the slides and the recording will be posted there shortly. Next slide, please. Make sure you register for the next ARP-AIRE webinar. This is not going to be a repeat of today. It will go in more in depth of the programmatic part of the ARP-AIRE competition. And we ask that you register. And there's a link there at the very bottom that allows you to do that. So please be sure to do that on August 5th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Next slide. If you have any follow-up questions, again, Shala Ortega, who is our competition manager and program officer for this program, and I'm also available as the group leader. Please contact us anytime. Once again, our webpage is listed there, and brand new, we are on Twitter with a handle of @OIE-Indian-Ed. Please join us there, not only for reminders for ARP-AIRE, but all kinds of other interesting things going out in Indian country. All right, Shala, I'm going to turn it back to you for the last part of the questions.
And Shala, I figure while we have our contact slide up, we can handle our last two questions. So the first question being, what is the proposed start date of activities under this funding?
It would be upon implementation. If once you've received the award, you can hit the ground running. It's not like there's a planning period for this piece.
Great. And then is there a mandatory annual directors meeting that needs to be budgeted for in this grant?
Yes, Allison, like October 1st, absolutely. And yes, we are asking any of our project directors to always plan. We never know if it's going to be virtual or in person at this point, but yes, all of our projects are asked to budget for a project directors meeting on the annual basis. That's a great question.
Great.
Any other questions?
The last question was just if we could review again what the definition of novice was.
You can put it up and we can look at it and we can go over it if you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh.
Okay, again, the novice applicant is actually, it's when we are talking about taking advantage of competitive preference priority points. And the novice applicant is the applicant that has not had an active grant from the U.S. Department of Education in the past 5 years. That's considered a novice applicant.
And that's going to be the last question that we have for this particular section.
Great. So I want to, on behalf of OIE, I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. Don't forget to join us for the second webinar scheduled for Thursday, August 5th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you and have a pleasant day. Good luck.